As I continue to give thought to who we are, what makes us up as a species, what is it that is the same within us, but at the same time very much can differentiate us? So the question I am asking on this video is this: who taught our species to kill, to torture, to perform human sacrifice of all natures, and cannibalism? Because here's the deal. If you begin to think about this simply from the fact that if we, meaning the human race, humanity, mankind, if it wasn't programmed into us, then you'd have to say, well, then who taught us? Now, we have stories that are just that. They're mythological stories of, somehow that because of, biting a fruit brought in the knowledge, and that's what it was, knowledge. That somehow or another, that with knowledge came the knowledge of torture, all the hideous things, right? Well, you see, we were never taught to question that, because then that says the sentient being who knows about it, right? Who apparently has all knowledge, well, it would mean, if you have to look at the implications, it would say that that being would be capable of those very same traits. Otherwise, why would they exist? Because conundrum becomes that if it wasn't God or the gods that taught us, then it was programmed in us. And to say our species was not taught, then we had this in us from the very beginning. And I don't know about you, but I can't accept that. And here's why. That means that there is nothing we can do to break this cycle, to stop the traits that are in us. I mean, why even try, right? Because as this video is going to show you, we're going to get into those traits because we have to address the ugly. We can't just simply live in a world where we simply pick and choose what realities we want to accept. And our species is really good for doing that. All right. Here's then what we must ask. How deep is this in us? Who did this to us? I mean, really. That's what we're really going to get really deep dive into. And I ask this question to you. Can a soul that does what we're about to see, how can a soul do such a thing? And how far back does this really go? And then the question that must be not only asked but answered by our species, can we change? That's the question, folks. So let's examine and see what history records. Now remember this. All of us have to begin to reprogram the automatic program that runs in the background. And that background is what we call your core. That's your core beliefs, you know, those things that you have built, your personality, your inner person, what she would define as your soul, what those beliefs are. That's your core. And the problem has been this: as technology has advanced, as we've gotten better and the machines have gotten much more intelligent and we can see further into the ground without even having to dig, we're finding out that the history that we were taught was wrong. And that goes with religion as well, but I digress. So when we begin to look at this, let's start looking and see here. So I have to tell you this. The following content is going to be disturbing because we're going to deal in the area specifically in the darker side of humanity. Now, and I'm going to tell you why I'm doing this. Because here's the hardcore reality. It's in you. It's in me. And what I'm about to show you is the indictment of our species. Now, it may be an indictment of the brutality that we are able to inflict. However, it's also a warrant for the one who taught us. Think about that. So you've been warned. It's going to get graphic, folks. So let's go. So we're going to talk about the depravity of who we are as a species. And we're going to deal with the whole issue of torture, human sacrifice. Now we're going to start with the Chinese and the Shang Dynasty. In the Shang Dynasty, human sacrifice victims were disemboweled, split in halves, beheaded, or chopped to death. The most common ceremonies were piths, which you see here, foundation, and internment sacrifices. For pit sacrifices, young men were ripped apart and buried without their possessions. Foundation sacrifices involved children and infants. And by the way, you're going to see this repeated no matter what time of the epoch that we're in or the culture. And the last part of this is while internment sacrifices focus on young women. Oh, ladies. Really, you gals really need to form your union. Really. All right. So let's talk about Norwegian. This is the Wicker Man. This is where the modern day movies and legends have come from. You see the Burning Man that takes place each year out in the Nevada desert. Right. Well, let's get a little background on this one because it's very grotesque. It says, what we know about ancient Britain is based on Roman writings. Julius Caesar, for instance, wrote that the Druids built massive wicker men, loaded them with human and animal sacrifices, and lit them on fire. Bodies found in bogs show evidence of ritualistic murder, and there may be even have been cannibalism involved, which I can tell you, the record is replete with that. I mean, and I know, folks, you're probably just looking at this, but if you go to the very end of this video, you're going to be a lot wiser. You're going to have a lot more understanding of not only who you are, but how we as a species are and what we're going to have to do to change. All right, let's continue. Now, in the Hawaiians, how they tortured and committed sacrifice as well as they would hang people upside down and beat them. And those sacrificed were mostly prisoners of war, though some were tribe members who broke laws or committed taboo acts. And you can only imagine what a taboo act would already be in this kind of environment. Sacrifices techniques ranged from strangulation to bone breaking to the removal of intestines. Ritualistic offerings to Kai, the god of war, and I think it's Lono, god of agriculture, were hung upside down and beaten to death. Ay, 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 ay. All right, let's get to the Egyptians. Yeah. All right. The pharaohs of the first dynasty, this is around 3200 BCE, right, were buried with their actual living retainers in a practice known as retainer sacrifice. Now, if you don't know what the retainer is, you're about to learn. All right, the ancient Semites, Israelites. This culture is, I don't know what else to say, but it just has a continuation of the sacrifice of children to Moloch. There he is, or it is. It's hard to say. And the term ancient Israelite is likely to conjure image of the biblical characters like King Solomon and the fables like Jonah and the whale and David and Goliath. Or maybe call to mind far more brutal stories, such as when Abraham almost sacrificed his son, or this tasty nugget from the Old Testament, now go, attack the Amalekites, and totally destroy all that belonged to them. Do not spare them. Put them to death, men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. I mean, it's crazy, folks, but listen. If you're of the Christian faith, this is the heritage. Considering this degree of savagery, it shouldn't be surprising that archaeological evidence indicates ancient Israelites ceremoniously burned infants to Moloch. Such sacrifices were made by those who worship Moloch, a bull god, who some suggest symbolized the terrifying power of nature. The sacrifice of a child showed the lengths to which the power-hungry people would go. Moloch and the practice of child worship in his honor stem from the Canaanite tradition. Now, you know, it all goes back. It's all related as well. And there you can see. This was around 1300 to 700 BCE. All right, let's get over into the Incas. They would raise children for slaughter. Like fellow Mesoamericans, the Mayans and Aztecs, the Incas were no strangers to human sacrifice. Not content with garden variety human sacrifices, right? The Inca kicked it up a notch with child sacrifice. They believed a healthy child was the grandest gift a god could receive. Kids were sacrificed for the sake of increased wealth and good fortune. Do we see that today? Only healthy, strong, and attractive children were suitable sacrifices. The most common forms of sacrifice included strangulation, a blow to the head, or being buried alive. Some children were raised solely for the purpose of being sacrificed and were very well cared for up until the slaughter to preserve the integrity and the value of the sacrifice. Now, as repulsed as it may be, it is what we are. All right, Mesopotamians, just about 2300 BCE, stabbed in the head. Oh yeah, this is one that you have to really get a hold of. Like the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, the royals of ancient Mesopotamia were buried with the rest of their household. This included some members of the royal court, such as soldiers, handmaidens, and servants. Human remains found at an archaeological site in Ur. All right, folks, where have you heard Ur? Well, let's go back to Genesis. Attest to more than 2,000 people being sacrificed this way. This is in modern-day Iraq. In an innocent near past, experts believe victims of sacrifices in Mesopotamia were poisoned peacefully before burial. Recent discoveries suggest a more brutal practice. According to skeletal remains, victims were stabbed in the head before burial. Whoa, talk about a splitting headache, huh? All right. Here we are with the Aztec. Stomachs ripped open. Human sacrifice was widespread in the Aztec culture, and sacrificial techniques were brutal. Sometimes victims had their hearts ripped out, and offered to the sun god. Other times, stomachs were ripped open, after which victims were pushed from the top of the temples. I mean, give me a break, right? But we have to examine this. Why is this in us? And don't think that we're so above this today that we have somehow ascended into a state of enlightenment. No matter how much we want to self-delude ourselves, it's still in us. Yeah, I know, it's brutal. All right, mass decapitations of slaves and POWs in the 20th century. Now, this gets back in Africa. Got so bad here, they had a yearly head business. And this lasted all the way up into the 20th century. And in the peak of this, in its heyday, 7,000 people were sacrificed under the leadership of one king. You see, doesn't matter where you go. All right, tossed into the pits, the Mayans. Here's a good one. The Mayans were very religious people, known for hosting elaborate ceremonies. Do we do that today? No, I digress. One of these ceremonies included the brutal practice of throwing human sacrifices into large limestone pits called cenotes, I believe. If I butchered that, hey, give me a mulligan. Which typically have water at the bottom. These huge sinkholes were believed to be portals to the spiritual realm. Yeah, they were. So people were pushed into them as divine sacrifices. Some claim those sacrificed were volunteers, but the majority of experts agree victims were violently coerced into participating in the ritual. Well, no matter how you look at it, they still got thrown in, and again, when you meet your end, that is a spiritual realm. So we continue. Now, I'm just going to go through these because these pictures represent a chronology of multiple cultures, multiple times, multiple heinous, barbaric human sacrifices. And you know, for the most part, many of this happened, as I've already shown you, goes back to records where it first started. But much of this was due to religious fervor. To say that any religion, including Christianity, is exempt? No. Christianity has a very bloody history. I mean, it is not something that you really want to spend a lot of time studying, because you will literally just walk away disgusted. And what we do as a species is amazing. And my question to you is, as I'm panning through these, is to ask you, a human soul, is this a human being? And by the way, crowds love it. I do say that the day will be coming forth here very quickly where you will begin to see public executions, because apparently we love it. We thirst for it. We lust for it. And again, if we can't do it by one reason or another, we'll make up one, either by the king or by the church. And throughout history, and it doesn't matter what culture it is, doesn't matter what religion it is, doesn't matter what time or what era. Women, you have faced and children have just faced the greatest brutality. The Nazis freezing children alive, first genetic children. We've seen the Holocaust. We've seen what happens. And don't think, folks, that we are again so civil. The madness continues. And my question is, who's at fault for all this? Who's to blame? I mean, I contend with who's the jerk that's responsible. Because whoever it is, I'd like to kick its ass. I mean, so we go back and we begin to ask ourselves, well, if it wasn't engineered into us, And that's just a whole nother program right there. Then who did it? Which God did it? Was it these gods? These guys seem to have the first place for originality, for name. There seems to be a lot of what we would call cross-pollination of cultures dealing with names. Seems to have a lot of connection no matter what culture, what time. It seems to be ever present. That there is a thread. It's like a tapestry. And the tapestry is all white. But you see a beautiful blue thread. And you can see it no matter how far you go. Now these guys continually seem to come up time and time again. And if that is the case, and if there could be a case made for this, then the question then would have to be asked, why? Why were we taught this? For whose pleasure was this somehow found to be proper? And again, even if you want to go back to the Garden of Eden story, the eating of the forbidden fruit, right? The tree of knowledge. Why was knowledge even a part of this? And again, no matter who the deity is, they continue to show up. Marduk, over and over again. And let's not forget the Elohims. The Elohims are ones, and I quote, love the smell of burnt flesh. Could it be possible that what we're really dealing with here are the same cast of characters? And I say characters. What if all are the same group of beings? I believe there has been a clue left right in front of us. And that clue is in Genesis 11, 6 and 7. And whether you read it from the Akkadian record or the Hebraic record or the Christian record, it still reads about the same. So let's read this. Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they do begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. Another translation. The Lord said, they are one people with one language. This is only the beginning of what they will do! Exclamation point. Now nothing they plan to do will be too difficult for them. Let us go down there and mix up their language so that they won't understand each other. Now I also give you a Jewish translation. And Hashem said, see, the Am, isn't that interesting? The I am, is Echad, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do. And now nothing will be impossible for them, which they have proposed to do. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their Sefat, that they may not understand one another's language. Are you getting the fact that whoever these gods are very much afraid of us learning to come together in thought, unity of thought. Could this be the key? A single, simple thought. The first step of where we get, folks, listen to me, and listen to me good on this. The first step is maintaining a thought. United. All of us. All the races. And as we master the ability to hold a thought, a single thought, such as harmony, as we get better to this, we can begin to think in bigger pictures. And who knows where that will lead to? It's that easy. They gave us the clue. They told us that if we ever got to this place, nothing would be impossible for us. Nothing. And there it is, right there in front of us. I mean, that's the whole purpose for 60 Seconds for Humanity. It's the greatest experiment of our time, but it's also the greatest opportunity of our time. Close before. Listen, I am convinced there have been enough small base experiments to validate this bigger experiment. I still say the evidence would completely vindicate the fact that what was done in 1985 with, We Are the World. They were on the right track. We as a species are on the right track. So this is going to be that first step. Holding the thought. We do that, folks. I believe it's the first step of a change for our species. All right, folks, be kind to one another. We'll talk real soon.